Now into the meat of the agenda today. Our first topic today is reduce strategies for using less water in the landscape with Lori Palmquist. Lori Palmquist is a landscape professional of 34 years who specializes in irrigation design, consultation, and education. She has gathered a large community of like-minded landscape professionals around her, as she has an online irrigation school with over 400 students, and her Puddle Stompers website has over 700 registered members. Lori's greatest hope is that we can all enjoy California appropriate landscapes well into the future, no matter what amount of water is available to us. And she hopes to inspire you today to use much less water in your projects. Please welcome Lori.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I just click once and my presentation will come up. Woo! It's so cool. I get to stand behind this podium. Usually I have to hold my stomach in, but you guys can't see my stomach, so let it all hang out, Lori. All right. Okay, using less water in the landscape. So using less water in the landscape is all about mindset. I have to advance this too. Yes, we've gotten a lot of rainfall in this water year, but we seem to be in drought more often than not. And Californians are soon going to be required to embrace California as a water conservation as a California way of life. You've already heard this term a couple of times this morning. So we're going to have to embrace this. So how do we muscle up our mindset? How do we train and beef up our attitudes and perspectives to consistently achieve something like this? Using much less water in a stunning landscape, rather than ending up in a situation like this. So my promise to you today, at the end of this talk, you'll have a full arsenal of strategies for ensuring that your landscapes will thrive no matter how much rainfall shows up in any given year. We're shooting for a complete mindset reset or a complete mindset shift here. So there are three elements to this mindset shift that I'm covering today. The first is lowering the water needs of the landscape. The second is leveraging alternative water sources. And the third is employing cutting-edge strategies. Lowering the water needs of the landscape. The low-hanging fruit of water conservation is removing that high water use plants and replacing them with low water use plants. The water districts are literally paying us to do this. And low water plants, once established, use only a quarter of the water that high water plants use, mainly cool season turf grass. This is big. It's a no-brainer. It's like selling your Humvee and buying a Prius. So no more needs to be said on this one. But lowering the water use of the landscape also involves upgrading your irrigation. Okay, so it's not just about the plants, it's about the irrigation too. So when I teach the quail training, I like to remind people or let them know that you have an area of turf grass that is 50% or less distribution uniformity. Then what ends up happening is that you have to apply almost double the amount of water to give that area of turf grass the water it needs. So there's a plant water requirement and there's an irrigation water requirement. And if that irrigation is really inefficient, that water requirement goes up and up and up and up. So we're talking about, when we talk about lowering the water needs of the landscape, it's about the plants and it's about the irrigation. So leveraging alternative water sources. Now, with a use less water mindset, we don't just turn on the tap. Here's how we can shift our thinking to which water source we use and when. Our first option is to use rainwater to irrigate the landscape. Using the landscape itself to capture the water passively, and or using barrels, tanks, and cisterns. Then our next option after rainfall, oops, hello. Well, these were supposed to come in one by one, but they have just eked out through the door. So the next one after rainfall, so we consider rainfall first. And then once that's all gone, once that water's all gone, then we consider recovered water from the house or the structure on the property. And this would be repurposed water from the house with, I know we're talking to mostly landscape professionals here, but if I were talking to homeowners, I would say collecting that warm up water in bowls and buckets and taking it outside and watering plants with it. But you can also install a Greywater system. You can have recycled water piped in from the water purveyor or the sanitary district or the city. And then the last resort is to use potable water as the last resort. So it's not, we're turning this whole paradigm on its head of what we're used to doing. We just turn on the tap and there's the irrigation, all right? So I'm asking you to think about it in a different order now. Okay, and then that potable water is whether it's piped in by the public water system or a well on the property. So with rain and plant water requirement, they're both measured in inches. And so that makes it easy to put them both onto a bar chart and compare them. And I don't know if you've ever seen anything like this before, but this is, once I started doing this, I thought, wow, this is so cool. So what this is in, I live in Richmond, California, and I monitor ever since 2007, I monitor practically every drop of rain that falls anywhere near me. So I monitor that because I'm a landscape water manager, or I was for many years. I see Chad smiling and nodding back there. He's a water manager also. So I tracked the rainfall, the annual rainfall from 2007 to 2021. And actually 2022 water year could be on here, but it's not. And it's right about the same as 2021 was there. So what I did was I put the inches of rainfall there, and then I superimposed the plant water requirement for high water, moderate water, and low water plants. So for their inches of plant water requirement. And then that purple line that's beneath the green line, that low water with mulch, this comes from a study done at Texas A&M University where they found that just 1 inch of mulch spread over a landscape area lowers the plant water requirement by 25%, okay? This is big, and I've even heard bigger numbers than that. I think 25% is very reasonable, and it feels a little bit low to me, but it makes me feel more comfortable to say, yes, 1 inch of mulch will lower the plant water requirement by 25%. And this is because it prevents evaporation of the water from the top part of the soil. And that is the main component of ETO, which is plant water requirement. That's ETO. For all of you who have taken the Quell training and understand this stuff, that is ETO. All right. So this now this water with this 25% less water with 1 inch of mulch, this applies to moderate and high water plants as well. I just didn't plot those on the on this chart. So then I make the claim here that California is a low water state. Now look at this chart. If in any one of these years, we had been restricted from using potable water in the landscape, which of these classifications of plants would have survived that? It seems pretty obvious to me. So California is a low water plant state, all right? So if we are going to go into the future and use less water, we need to use low water plants in our landscape. All right, so here I've done the same thing, only I've plotted it out over the course of 12 months instead of 15 years. Hey, good one back there. I hate when that happens. All right, so I've plotted it out from January through December, and it's the same thing. Now I got these are historical rainfall totals from a website called usclimatedata.com. And so this is historical rainfall for San Jose, California for January through December. And then I plotted on there the high, moderate, and low water use plants in this area. So there are a few things I'd like to point out about this. If we look at the high water plant water requirement first, we can see that only in November, December, January, and February, would rainfall take care of high water plants. All right, so that's only 4 months out of the year. For moderate water plants, we have November, December, January, February, and March. So we've got 5 months out of the year. And then for low water plants, this is where it gets really fun, because it's 7 months out of the year, and we may even be able to stretch it to May. So we've got October, November, December, January, February, March, April, and look at May is kind of pushing its way up there. So that water that is a gift from the sky takes care of low water plants for 7.5 months out of the year in the Bay Area. And as you'll see in the next slide, it's not just the Bay Area, okay? All right. So if we were to, see, so if we were to apply the order of the water source preferences that I showed you on previous slides, we can think first of leveraging the benefits of rainfall as far into the summer as possible. Then we move on to that next option, which is Greywater from the house or structure. And actually, Alan will be talking about this in his talk after mine, and Peter will be talking about stormwater as well. All right, so then the next one here. Now, with this slide, I wanted to show you that it's pretty much the same story, even if you go south of San Jose. You know, it's an even better story when you go north of San Jose. But when you start traveling south, it's pretty much the same story. So I've taken 4 different cities here, and I did the same plotting on here. And in the top left corner of each city, I've got Merced, Riverside, San Diego, and Palm Springs. And at the top left, I have the average inches of rainfall per year. And then the top right for each city, it is the average, water use requirement, the annual water use requirement of low water plants. Now, what I found when I started plotting these, and I've probably done about close to 20 of these around California. And what I found is that if the annual rainfall is higher than the plant water requirement, the annual historical rainfall in inches is higher than the plant water requirement in inches, then in those places, they can leverage that free water that falls from the sky well into the summer. And in some places, it's all the way through the summer. I live in Richmond, and I helped to manage a demonstration, a Master Gardener demonstration garden, where we put 2 inches of mulch down and we didn't water anything for 2 years, nothing. And it's super thriving, okay? So in some areas, the rainfall can take you all the way through with mulch. And in some areas, you can get as far into the summer as possible, all right? So then when we look at these charts, oh, and I should mention that Palm Springs in the bottom right there, Palm Springs doesn't cut it. All right, Palm Springs pretty much has to default after a couple of months, they have to default to that option number 2, which would be Greywater from the structure. All right, so then the big question here is, how do we hold on to that water? The water falls from the sky. We catch it in the landscape, and either passively with the landscape, or we catch it in cisterns, tanks, and barrels. But how do we hold on to that water? That's the big question. Well, when you want to store water, or any liquid for that matter, what you do is you get a container. And in this case, it's a jar, and the jar has a lid. So you take that jar, you pour water in it, you put the lid on the top, and you are storing water, okay? You put a lid on it. Well, my friends, mulch is the lid of the landscape. I'm going to repeat that. Mulch is the lid on the landscape. Now remember, I told you back that mulch cuts down on or lowers the plant water requirement by 25%. So that is the way to hold it in for much longer and make it last as far into the summer or through the summer. All right. Another way to hold on to the water is to contour the landscape, to slow the water down that flows from the roof. Slow it, spread it, sink it, store it. This photo is from the publication Watershed Approach to Landscape Design, and it illustrates this rather nicely. So as you're going to find out from Peter, we don't really just take that roof water and send it right out to the storm drain as quickly as possible, like we used to. We need that water. We need that water in the landscape. We want to create a living sponge of our landscape and hold on to that water. So we can do really aesthetically pleasing things with the landscape itself to hold on to the water, like dry stream beds and rain gardens and swales, etc. Okay. All right, so here's where I talk about those strategies for using less water. So the first one is, I've got 5 of them here. The first one is to water all plants as if they were low water plants. The second is to stretch out the watering days to drive the plants of the roots of the plants down deeper and deeper. And the third is to use the Valley Water Scheduler to adjust the irrigation schedule monthly or more often if you like. The fourth is to install a smart controller. And the fifth is to use a soil moisture sensor to control irrigation frequency. So here we go. Now, water all plants as low water plants. Now, this is my mom's front yard. And when I planted this for her, I wasn't a water efficient landscaper yet. I was a pretty plant landscaper. So I put in all the pretty plants I could find out there in Rio Vista, California, the ones that could take the really harsh, brutal wind that they get out there almost 24/7. So this is, let's see. Let me see that because you have to give the area, yeah. So in this case, in this suggestion, this strategy, what I would say is to take this whole area, and this is an irrigation zone that we have here. So if you're using the most efficient irrigation we have is drip. And the most efficient drip is line source drip or grids because it waters 100% of the soil. So if you were watering this, or even if you were using sprinklers, which you really shouldn't be using sprinklers on planted areas. And in fact, you can't do that per our landscape ordinance. So if you're watering it uniformly, what you would have to do is water to the higher water use plant in this irrigation zone. And this is a really super common scenario here where we have low and moderate water plants mixed. So the moderate, we're watering to the moderate and they're happy, they're groovy, they're happy. Thank you. And then the low water plants are getting twice the amount of water that they require. All right. So FYI, in case you don't know this, moderate water plants need half the amount of water that high water plants need, and low water plants need a quarter the amount of water that high water plants need. So this is very much not recommended. So in this case, with this strategy, I would be recommending to run this irrigation zone as low water plants. Oh, and by the way, don't do this. All right, we don't want our irrigation zones to have 2 water uses, and especially not 3. All right, so how much water do plants need anyway? Do you know how much water plants need? If you and I were standing in front of a street tree that you planted 2 years ago, and we were wondering, and I asked you, how much water does this need per week, this tree? Would you know? No, you wouldn't know. We don't know how much water anything needs because it depends on what city you're in. It depends on the size of the plant. It depends on whether it's a low, moderate, or high water use plant. It depends on the size of the plant or the square footage of the planted area. There are many elements that go into determining how much water anything needs in terms of gallons. So I developed this app here. A lot of you know that I am an irrigation geek and a technology geek. I develop apps, and I've developed about 23 of them now, apps and websites that are out there in public. And this is one of them. So with this one, what you can do is in any plant in any incorporated city in California, in any time frame, any plant material, and the various sizes of plants and planted areas, you can look up how many gallons that plant needs, because sometimes we have to water things by hand. And if you're counseling the homeowners to use water from the house, like their warm-up water, they're going to need to know how many gallons a week that street tree needs if they're going to water it by hand. So this is one way to know that. Now, I had said in the first strategy, actually, I'm going to go to this one instead. I said in the first strategy that to schedule everything as if it were low water plants. So we just call everything low water. Now, to do that, what you can do is you can either use this Valley Water Scheduler, and this is the one that I got to develop with a world-class graphic designer, a wonderful graphic designer, and we just launched this a few days ago. And some of our beta testers for this app are sitting in this room. Thank you, beta testers. And so what you can do is you can use this, and your clients can use this, anybody can. What you can do is just when you feed in the data for each zone, then you just tell it, hey, this zone is low water plants, and this zone is low water plants, all right? And then you can always use extra water from the house for those plants that are complaining the loudest when you do this. All right, so then I'm gonna go back to this one. Another one of the strategies was to install smart controllers. And this is also a plug for Valley Water's smart controller rebates. Most water districts in California do have these rebates, and they're literally paying us to put in smart controllers. Now, what you can do to program everything as low water is, now remember that with smart controllers, that some smart controllers take the plant data for each zone, and some smart controllers want you to put in a peak schedule. All right, so in this photo, the controllers in the top row, you put in a peak schedule, and the ones in the bottom row, you put in the plant data. So just know that there's that difference. All right. So you're definitely, thank you, you're definitely welcome to use the, at valleywaterscheduler.com to use that for scheduling your irrigation systems. All right, do I need to say anything more about that? Oh yeah, so this will save your data too, and you can come back to it. You don't create an account or anything. It's an open public thing. So you just put in the address and it takes you there. And if you've already entered in data for an address, it'll be there when you come back. All right, and you can download a PDF of the schedule as well. All right, so another strategy is to adjust the irrigation schedule monthly, all right? Most smart controllers have this, I mean, conventional controllers have this feature called seasonal adjust. And what I'm recommending is that you not adjust your irrigation seasonally, but you do it monthly, all right? Now this chart, what this chart shows, and I got this from the Quell program, what this chart shows is the water waste that happens when we leave in a peak schedule through July, through August, September, and October. What it is the blue bars represent the plant water requirement for each month of the year, and the red bars represent the water waste if that is left in place, and especially look at July through October. And we can see that there is a lot of water waste. And the reason that people, this is a very common scheduling practice. And the reason that people give for doing this, they say, hey, we've got 100-degree days in September and October. And yes, we have 100-degree days, but the plant water requirement is going down, down, down. And that's because the days are getting shorter. The sun is on a lower trajectory. So it's not evaporating that water from the soil as readily as it is in the summer. So then how much water are we even talking about here? In San Jose, California, for every 1,000 square feet of landscape, if you have this scheduling practice going on. In August, it's an extra inch for 620 gallons wasted. In September, it's 2.4 extra inches for a 1,488 gallons wasted. And in October, it's 3.5 inches for 2,170 gallons wasted for a total of 4,278 gallons wasted in these 3 months. Now remember, this is just 1,000 square feet in somebody's yard, okay? What happens when that goes out to blocks and neighborhoods and cities? Okay, so this compounds itself. So we really, is very important to change your irrigation schedule monthly at the very least. And then the last one that I have is to use soil moisture sensors. Now the biggest irrigation manufacturers whose components we use in the Bay Area, Rainbird, Hunter, and Toro, all three of them have a soil moisture sensor that you can hook up to any controller, okay? It doesn't just have to be that brand of controller, all right? So you can hook it up, and what it does is it denies the irrigation from happening until the soil is dry enough to need irrigation, okay? So what I like to recommend to people is that if you don't have any experience with any of these, then install one at your house so you can see how it works and get a feel for it. And then also a big thing, a light bulb that's going to go off in your head is, oh my gosh, water stays in the soil way longer than I thought it would. Okay, so this would give you an education. And if you hook it up to your controllers and let it deny the irrigation from happening unless irrigation is needed by the soil, because we're watering the soil, not the plants. Okay, so when the soil says, hey, I'm dry enough and allows the irrigation, then cool, we allow the irrigation. Okay, so then just have a little tiny closing here. I hope I've filled your head with lots of great ideas and that I've inspired a mindset that propels you to create and maintain landscapes that use very little water. I'd love to hear how you're doing. All right, are there any questions? We've got Herb back there. If you wanna, you need the mic, Herb. Go.
There you go. For the people online.
You're talking about using mulch. You know, sometimes people think, oh, black mulch is so beautiful in my landscape. Sun, black means heat, means evaporation of water out of your soil. Am I correct?
I've looked at different studies on that, and I've seen studies that say the color makes no difference.
Oh.
Okay, and that the dyes are not dangerous either. So, but you need to, I Google everything. Google it. But I suspect that it's fine.
Right up here.
Also, there is a website that tells you actually what the water needs are for plants, and I noticed you didn't mention that. Do you want to say something about that?
The water, is that WCALS? Yeah, is that my WCALS or the official WCALS? Okay, WCALS, Water Use Classifications of Landscape Species. Thank you, Ed. It's a website. It's a Lori website and a state-sponsored website by UC Davis.
Well, Lori, only because you have questions and comments, I wanted to make a comment. I've been working in the landscape in the Bay Area for the last 20 years. A big thank you to you. I see you everywhere in the Bay Area trying to save water. So cheers.
Oh, thank you, Lauren. Oh, you just made my heart sing. Can you guys hear that? I can hear it.
Lori, the study talks about the 1-inch mulch. I wonder if it's 2 inches or 3 inches, if it makes a big difference, or if they just pick the 1 inch because that's the thickness of, you know, even if you go 2 or 3 inches, the 25% will stay.
Okay, repeat after me. I wish. But it's the law of diminishing returns, I believe, and that's why they only said 1 inch. So it doesn't mean that 2 inches is 50% and 3 inches is 75%. It definitely doesn't mean that. But I have not seen a study that takes it beyond that 1 inch. Okay, thanks for the question, Hector.
We have some online question.
Yeah, so Sean was wondering, does a smart controller increase water use if installed on an inefficient system?
Does it increase it? Well, it's that garbage in, garbage out thing. So if you put in the right stuff into a smart controller, you get the right stuff coming out. And I also like to say that a smart controller will not improve a dumb irrigation system, okay? But what it does do is it adjusts that schedule every day according to real-time weather. So if it rains, it doesn't irrigate. So at least you're improving it in some way. But you definitely, and I'd like to have people start with the smart controller. Just start improving things with that. Right.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
Yeah. Oh. Is there any significant difference between organic mulch, bark, or whatever, as opposed to stone mulch?
Yeah, organic mulch and stone mulch. I've looked into that really extensively. And what I've seen recommended is that if the plantings have come from an area with stone and not bark, like desert plants, then you really shouldn't be putting bark on desert plants, okay? They have been adapted to having stone around them or sand around them. So really it's about the plants and whether they naturally live in areas that have detritus from the trees, you know, things that naturally fall from the trees and become mulch.
Awesome.
Thanks, Greg.
Hi, my name is Lori. I've been with the Landscape Committee for the last 10 years or something, along with Brian and Director Santos. I don't know if he's still here, probably not. Two comments is those of us in the landscape, world know how important soil is. And I know we didn't touch on this yet, but I think, soil is so important. It obviously, this is part of it, but just making sure, you can have the most efficient irrigation and schedule it properly. But if you've got any, dead soil or inefficient soil, it's always going to struggle. So I think that's really important that we just remember it's a whole process. You can't just take one without the other. You really need to look at the landscape as a living, breathing ecosystem. Yes. So, fixing one part of it is great, but fixing and addressing all of these things is even better. The second thing is I was one of the beta testers for the Valley Water Scheduler, and Lori is extremely humble. She always has been. It is a phenomenal tool, and we are so lucky to have this, and to have Valley Water sponsor this is phenomenal. And I think we were talking about this just recently, this is not just a tool for Valley, for this county. Lori is, allowing this to be used statewide. And for us to have Lori here, presenting and then also, developing these tools for us, she's a gold mine. So thank you, Lori.
Oh, man. Thank you, Lori. Wow. The heart is making a chorus right now.
All right. I just entered my Sacramento address and was looking at it. So it works.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Are we good? Yep. All right. Thanks, you guys. Let me make sure I got everything.
Wonderful. Well, from reduce to reuse, we're going to go to Alan Hackler, who runs Bay Maples Wild California Gardens. Alan created Bay Maples Wild California Gardens to address the divide between California's ongoing water needs and the human desire to live in harmony with a well-maintained, beautiful landscape. Bay Maples creates low-impact, water-saving gardens through the use of native plants, recycled or repurposed materials, and irrigation strategies involving gray water and rainwater catchment. And let's welcome Alan to the podium.
All right, how's everyone doing today? Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to share some information with everybody. So how do I get over to my presentation? Cool. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so my name's Alan Hackler. I'm a licensed contractor and a certified gray water installer since 2009. And so in the last 13 years or so, I've been able to kind of hone our process in, and I'm excited to kind of share with you kind of what we learned and sort of our approach to putting in these systems. So I'm going to focus on, it's going to be kind of a case study on a pumped system. And I'm assuming a lot of people in here are somewhat familiar with longitude landscape systems, so I'm not going to really go into that too much. So this is a garden that we installed, my player works great, last year. And this was a really exciting project because it, in my opinion, is kind of sort of like the pinnacle goal of what you want to achieve when you're doing a gray water system. Not my particular work, but just this concept of how to apply a gray water system. So this was a home in San Jose, not too far from here. And the homeowner had reached out to me last spring saying, I want to keep and maintain my existing garden, and I want to still stay within the kind of watering restrictions. And how do I go about that without having to, get a fine or have my garden kind of look like it did during the time where she let the front yard die and a lot of the plants in the back were kind of dying. But her and her husband were avid gardeners and really wanted to find a way to keep their garden looking green. So they reached out to me and asked me what were some different solutions. They were really excited about possibly doing gray water and rainwater, putting in drought tolerant plants. And so they were very open to kind of whatever options were, and kind of were looking for me to give them some ideas and some inspiration. So they were great clients to work with because they gave me a lot of opportunity to come up with some creative solutions. So I'm using my pointer a lot because there's a lot of little details I'm going to point to. So whenever I'm doing initial walkthrough of a garden, I feel like that first visit is really critical because you can find a lot of really good strategies and come up with some creative solutions. So in this project, they had sort of, I wish I had a before picture, but the picture on the left kind of shows this sort of unused space on the side of the house. I think everyone's got this kind of part of their house where you keep some old wheelbarrows and some random trash cans or whatnot. And so it usually doesn't really have a lot of functionality. So this was a really great location on the property to position some rain tanks and a gray water system. And an additional benefit was the bathrooms were located on the side of the house. So you can see the bathroom window right here. And for doing a gray water system, you want to have the filter kind of basin unit as close to the bathrooms as much as possible. It makes the putting in the subfloor plumbing to achieve the 2% grade you need into the tank. So I'm going to leave some time for questions at the end because I'm probably going to have a lot of jargon. And so if anyone was kind of questioning about what I'm, so hopefully I don't brush over too much, but so achieving grade is really key in being able to put in one of these systems in, because many times if you can't get grade or there's not enough space in the crawl space, a gray water system may not be possible. So having the tank as close to the bathrooms is a really good plus to being able to achieve these kind of systems. So what was great about this location is there's plenty of room here. This is a pretty wide area. It had about 5 feet from the house to the fence. So it was able to accommodate all the systems that we put in here. So this actually has a combination of a gray water and rainwater system. So I'm going to go forward to the next slide here. And so here's just a close up of the tanks kind of fitting in that space. I'm going to go into this a little more in another slide too, but so the type of system that we put in, there we go. Cool. I'm sorry about this kind of stuff. Okay, so the system we put in is I'm not promoting this particular brand, but just so you guys know, it's an Aqualoop system. They actually use a few parts from a few different manufacturers to kind of create this system. And it has some really cool features, which I'll go into some later slides, but also incorporates 6 420-gallon tanks. And one of those tanks is for gray water. The other 5 were for rainwater storage. This kind of system does require a permit. It will usually require a plumbing permit, and sometimes it'll require a review from Public Works, depending on where the tank is located on the property, and also what municipality you're dealing with. So this system is used for irrigation and for indoor non-potable use. And you'll see some more of that into the slide. It collects water from 2 bathrooms and a laundry system. And there's a lot of info in here. Okay, so this is, I have some printouts of this particular slide. I think any designers in the room might find this kind of useful. So it's a good way to kind of figure out how you can sort of incorporate this into a design. I'm going to kind of point out some of the key components. So basically here's our little, the 2 bathrooms. And so they're collecting water from showers and sinks and our laundry machine, and they're flowing to the tank, which you saw in, so this picture earlier. So this is that tank that's in the schematic. And so all the fixtures are flowing to that tank on the side of the house. And this is kind of the brains of the system. This is where the filter and the pump are located. And once the water is filtered, I'm going to jump around the slides a lot. I do apologize, but there's a lot of information to cover. So I'm trying to do my best to convey without using too much jargon here. Let me get to the next slide. Okay, so here is the actual schematic of that tank. So in that tank, the water will flow from those bathrooms. It's going to go through this little pre-filter, and then it will then sit in the tank. And this is where our pump and secondary membrane filter are located. And so the way this system works, the first so you have 3 stages of filtration. So the first stage is our pure rain pre-filter. So this is designed to catch the largest debris, hair, shaving stubble, shaving cream, toothpaste. Those are some of the biggest things that kind of get caught up in your filter for a gray water system. So this is going to catch that larger debris stuff, that kind of gunk. If you've ever seen a gray water tank, they get kind of funky. This is what gets that initial kind of debris out of the system. Once it's gone through the pure rain filter, the water will kind of fall down this little section right here and then drop into the tank. So this side is our inlet. This is our check valve. So what the check valve does, if there's ever a sewer blockage further down the line from the street, the sewage water can't flow back into your gray water tank. And so this is what this little check valve, and there's a little access port on top. Once it goes through the filter, it's going to come down the vertical outlet and into your tank. That's our first step in this process. So the secondary process is our membrane filter. And this filter is going to catch all the smaller debris. So basically small organic matter, whatever's in the soap product that you're using is all going to catch that kind of debris. And once it goes through the membrane filter, it is going to, so the actual tank itself is a 35-gallon tank. Made out of polyethylene. It's 18-inch diameter and 30 inches deep, basically the size of a small garbage can. And so if you look at this little, all the little media here on the side, so these are basically little plastic balls, and they are designed to basically house sort of the beneficial microbes. And so those beneficial microbes are what's going to break down the final layer of organic material inside the gray water. And you can see there's kind of little bubbles in here. The system has a pump that basically pumps oxygen into this tank. And so the oxygen is what's basically keeping all those beneficial microbes alive. And those microbes are able to break down the gray water material. If any of you have ever been next to a gray water tank or any kind of sewage, even opened up a 2-inch drain on this, I mean, they get disgusting really quickly. So the oxygen is what keeps the tank from staying aerobic, not going anaerobic. And so it allows the microbes to kind of do their job and break down the gray water. And so I think I skipped over this slide earlier, but so this particular system is an NSF 350 certified system. So NSF is National Science Foundation. So they've gone through and certified this process as being able to clean the water to a level that allows the water to be used for overhead spray and for storage. So if anyone's familiar with the Greywater Code, which got passed in 2009, some of the stipulations for that are you can't use gray water for overhead spray, and you can't have any storage, you can't have any human contact. So having this certification allows this water to be used for a much larger range of uses, just keeps the water cleaner, allows you to not have to have so much of a gray water specific irrigation components, and you'll see in the slide later on. So having this process is sort of the key component that sort of separates this, not particularly this system, but this approach to gray water filtration, as opposed to other gray water systems, which purely use a membrane that just has physical removal. There's no kind of bacterial breakdown of the material. So this is what really excites me about these kind of systems, is be able to use the water for a much larger range of uses. So that's what all these little kind of bubbles are here on the side. And it's actually when it's is running and the bacteria has a chance to really kind of start doing their job, this water will get cleaned in about 24 hours. And you could stick your hand right into the tank. It's not sort of this kind of gross bacteria thing. So it's really exciting to see these in person, if you're a gray water nerd. So yeah, so here's, so once it's gone through the filter, actually, let me go back one slide. Maybe it's one more slide forward. Where do I have? I thought I had. I'm so sorry. Okay, so let me go back here. So the water will come from the house right through here. It's a buried 2-inch ABS pipe coming from the bathroom and showers and laundry. Once it goes through this, the bioreactor, if you can see right here, this little yellow guy, there's a float switch. And that basically tells the controller when the water is full and to send the water out to the storage tank. So this little brown pipe right here is the outlet pipe from the pump in the bottom. So once it's had a chance to sit in the tank for 24 hours, it's enough time for the biological activity to happen. The water is now clean enough to be stored. And then it sends that water via this is a 1/2 inch. It's actually a blank Netafim line. So it's got some flex to it, so it makes it easier to install. And then once it's gone through the filtration, it can now be stored in these 24 or 420 gallon Bushman tanks. So that's this guy right here. So this particular project we had 6 Bushman tanks on the side of the house, and 5 of them were for rainwater storage, and then 1 of them is for greywater storage. And so in most cases, you would never be able to store this greywater. That water would go anaerobic basically overnight. So this is one of the benefits of doing this is this allows you to really kind of fine tune your irrigation schedule. Most greywater systems, your irrigation schedule is dependent on when greywater is available. And so in most instances, every time you take a shower or run laundry, that's when you're irrigating your landscape. So being able to store it, you could basically use that water and you could run your irrigation based on whatever the water efficient irrigation system, a lot of some of the techniques that Lori was mentioning. And so you can have that flexibility of when you water and how long you water, by being able to store it. So this really opens up a ton of options for how you can use greywater. And you can, based on the amount of space and the amount of people in the home, you could have a larger or smaller grain tank. So you kind of size it based on the water being produced. So in this instance, they have a family of 4. 2 of the kids are there part-time and come and go, so they're not there full-time. So if it were maybe 4 permanent household members in the household, I would maybe go to maybe a 600 or 800 gallon tank. So every case is going to be a little bit different depending on space and occupants. And so once the water is in the tank, we have, so this is the air blower, which is going to be sending water into our bioreactor. So we kind of housed it in this little compartment made from reclaimed wood. And so this is what provides the air to the tank. And this guy up here is basically what's kind of monitoring the bioreactor. So it talks to the float switch, letting you know when to pump the water from the bioreactor to the storage tank. It also lets us know when there is not enough greywater being produced. So if there's a lack of greywater being produced, if the homeowners are on vacation or there's no one there to take showers or do laundry, it'll send makeup water. And so this little controller is kind of what's talking to the system to make those changes. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So here's just a close-up of that the blower, and then this is you can go through. It's got a bunch of different options that kind of tell you what the water flow is, what your irrigation usage is, if the float meter is reading properly, if the potable water connection is active. So this is just kind of your sort of just giving you the up-to-date stats on what's happening in the system. And so this part is our on-demand pump. So this is a 1 horsepower Grundfos on-demand pump. So what this pump does is it's basically its goal is to always hold the water line under pressure, and it will only kick on when it notices an irrigation valve turn on. So what's good about this particular pump is it doesn't require a bunch of additional sensors to mount inside the tank to tell you when it needs water. So it's a very simple, it's a very advanced pump, but it runs in a very simple fashion. So it just basically monitors when there's a drop in pressure. So every time an irrigation valve kicks on, this pump will turn on and then send water out to the landscape based on the Hunter. This particular project uses a Hunter controller. And also this is going to send water to our indoor non-potable. So for toilet flushing and for laundry. So you can see right here, this is a 1/2-inch PEX line. And so that 1/2-inch PEX line is plumbed to 2 toilets indoors and also for the laundry. So even though this system can be used for laundry, I was not able to convince the client that to have enough confidence in the system to be able to wash their laundry. I'm hoping as they see the system be used long enough that they would have more confidence in it. So, but that's okay. There's, always a process to getting people to adapt these systems or adopt these systems. But it is an option that you can use it for laundry usage. You could also use it for, if it were a commercial site, you could use it for cooling purposes and for other maybe commercial type functions. And these systems can be used on larger projects, not just residential. So on those kind of systems, there's a lot more options for how you could use that water. But so this is our connection that goes under the house. And these other 2 lines, we use Schedule 80 PVC. So we have one line going to the backyard and one line going here to the front yard. And then we have let's see the next slide. And so here is basically the connection inside the house behind the toilets. So you can see once you've plumbed it under the house, at this point, it's going to function just like a typical angle stop would for a toilet. And we've kept the original angle stop, and that is still plumbed to the existing municipal supply. So if there were ever an incidents where there's no power, then the pump wouldn't work outside and you wouldn't be able to flush your toilets. So if that scenario ever happened, you can simply unplug the line coming from the Greywater system and plug it back into the municipal supply. So you're never going to be left without the ability to flush a toilet. So it's kind of a little backup supply. And here's our municipal makeup water line. So as you can see, there's this is a 1/2-inch solenoid valve, which connects to a municipal potable supply. And there's this little sensor is connected to the sensor inside the box. So if there's ever a lack of gray water being produced by the system, it will open up the valve and send makeup water. And the makeup water will send water into the actual tank, not directly to the irrigation. So basically the whole system is always going to still be dependent on that one pump. So whenever there's a lack of water, what it'll do is it'll fill up. There's always one tank, which is sort of our working tank. And so that is basically what's always going to be controlling the water to the irrigation. So if there's a lack of water, it'll fill up the tank just high enough to fill one irrigation cycle. So it'll add anywhere from 100 to 200 gallons to satisfy that irrigation cycle, and then turn off and wait until there's either gray water, or if there's still not gray water being produced, it'll rely back to the potable water. And this is, I'm sure everyone's probably seen these. This is just where the rainwater connection is. So the way this system works, it's always going to take gray water first as its kind of first priority for water usage, just because it's being produced daily. So it's always going to want to catch that water, use that first. Since rainwater is more intermittent, it's going to use rainwater as a secondary usage, and then third will be potable. So it's kind of the hierarchy of water use for this system. And then, so the beauty of this system, I'm not sure how much experience everyone has with some of the different manufactured gray water systems out there, but I think one of the biggest challenges is so many of the products are like a proprietary products or proprietary controllers. So there's like one-off systems. So every time you have to install one, you have to sort of use their product. There's not a lot of uniformity. And so if there's this problem with the system, it's hard to get parts, they're expensive. So the beauty of this system is you can use a lot of off-the-shelf parts that you can find at any landscape supply store. So I think that's a really big plus to this kind of system. So this particular system runs off just a simple Hunter Pro HC controller with a WeatherSmart configuration. So I think the more parts you can use that are off the shelf, it's gonna be a bigger selling point to your homeowners. One, it keeps costs down, and it's easier for them to replace. Many times when we put these systems in, we do maintenance, sometimes they have someone else doing the maintenance. So if I can make the system easier for whoever's doing the maintenance to understand and use, it's just a kind of a plus and a better thank you, selling point to these kind of systems. Yeah, and so this garden runs off of just a simple Netafim tech line, RW for reclaimed water. You don't need to use this. You could use a simple tech line CV. We went with the RW just because it has the purple stripe, just to make sure it's clear to anyone else in the future to know that this system is running a Greywater system. But you could use any Netafim product or any inline type drip product, a Hunter or Rainbird would work just as well. So some of the benefits of this system, so we get system maintenance. So the main maintenance of this system is cleaning out the little membrane filter. I know it's so funny because this is like this high-tech system and the filter just looks like a ball of yarn wrapped up around a piece of metal. But what the beauty of this is, it creates basically as many surface areas to catch that gray water as much as possible. So even though it looks kind of like a homemade type setup, it actually works fantastically well. And so basically the maintenance on this is really going to be dependent on how many people are living in a house. I always say there's a 1-to-1 ratio of length of hair and to how often is it to be, and that's not a slight on with long hair. I used to have long hair, but the more long hair is, more this thing gets caught up with things. So maybe a 2 to 3 inch kind of time period between washing this. You can just pull it out, use it with a simple power washer. We'll wash it every once in a while. You want to do like a bleach dunk to really get some of that grime off there. But besides that, that is sort of the extent of the maintenance of the system. So it's really not much more complicated than cleaning a pool filter or changing the water softener. So really to maintain the system, it doesn't take really any advanced training or, even that much, experience with these systems. So I really wanted to get more people feeling comfortable, to sell these to your product, these concepts to your clients. And, a lot of people worry about the maintenance side. So the maintenance is quite low or quite simple. So some of the benefits with this is, I really can't stress, to me, when people are calling me, asking about gray water systems, and they're really excited about doing the gray water portion of it. And I kind of give them the cost of doing the gray water system. And then they realize that a big part of the gray water system is basically having to change so much of your irrigation. So you have to, most traditional like pumped style gray water systems, you have to run all subsurface drip irrigation. And in many instances that requires them to rip up all their existing system, rip up their plants, and not all the time, but in many cases, especially people who really are, want to keep that lawn. And so, thank you. And then there are gray water systems where you can use subsurface irrigation for the lawn, and people are really excited about that. But then the challenge is to put that subsurface irrigation on an existing lawn means you have to remove the lawn, put the subsurface irrigation in, and reinstall the lawn. And so to most people, that cost is just not worth it to them. So if I can put this gray water system in, and if they're really want to keep that lawn, they can do this without having to rip it all up. So it really keeps some of the landscape costs down. In many instances, the gray water systems that we put in, the landscape and irrigation component can be just as expensive as the actual gray water plumbing work. So this really helps to give a more financial incentive to people. So I think that's a really, really big bonus for this. And also the larger use of gray water. So not only can you use it for irrigation, if you can use it for indoor non-potable, to me, I think that's a big plus. Not only does it give you a larger range of uses, it gives you more opportunity to use gray water system in a wintertime. In many instances, if you're creating gray water in the winter, your plants don't want that extra water. They may not need it. So if you can use the water for toilet flushing and for hopefully laundry, I think that's also another big plus to people. And also this allows you to use with a rainwater system too, with this particular system. So I think that's a big plus. And also the storing of the gray water is also, so those are really, in my opinion, kind of game changers for getting more and more people to adopt these type of advanced gray water systems. I think I'm getting close to time. I've really covered a lot, but I want to give some time for questions. So if you're trying to get a potential customer or yourself or a friend to do these systems, my advice how you can incorporate this is it's always I've got people who come and ask me to do a gray water system, even finding out, do they create enough gray water to make it worth it? Lots of times maybe an empty nesters or they don't have kids. So sometimes the numbers just, or the available water that they're producing doesn't make sense for a gray water system. So always want to look into that. If there's ever none of gray water being produced, I really focus my energy on doing a rainwater system. Also checking the plumbing. A lot of times if they're on a slab foundation or they can't make grade, those are also things that can affect it. So it's always good to assess to see if they're even a good candidate to do these kind of systems. And also the best time to do a gray water system is during major remodels or new construction, because all the pipes are available, much easier to access. You can leverage the fact that they're already getting permits. A lot of times they're already getting financing from a bank to do these modifications, to redo the home. So you can kind of piggyback some of those costs together. So those are really good kind of ways to make the system more cost effective and easier to install. So if you can kind of time it to doing that, it's fantastic. I'm getting the look that I need to wrap it up. Yes. So if anyone has any questions, I would love to. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Hi, what is the average cost of this kind of installation, and are there rebates for it?
So unfortunately, there's no rebates for these type of pump systems, only for longitudinal landscape right now. I would say these kind of systems, I'd say the gray water component alone, but without the landscape portion, is going to be anywhere in the $25,000 to $35,000 range. The landscape portion is going to be really dependent on what the existing landscape is, how big the house is, what the watering is. The plumbing can vary quite a bit too, depending on if you're, lots of times when we're doing these systems, if they have an old cast iron or a galvanized, like a really old galvanized system, it's more costly, materials are more costly. So the rate cost can vary quite a bit, but I would say expect at least to be a $25,000, $35,000 range. That also includes design time, permitting, a plumber. So
Awesome. Right here.
Hi, a couple of questions. One, I saw that virtually everything we looked at was made of plastic.
Unfortunately.
And in our neck of the woods, temperatures go down to the 20s, they go up to maybe 110. So I'm wondering what the ranges are on, what that plastic can hold up to temperature wise. And then also, are there any things that you then train the homeowner on? You may not put this down the drain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest one is bleach. You can't put down a drain, obviously. The nice thing about this particular filter, because it has sort of the biological element that can clean, you can kind of get away with a lot more soaps. And also all the biological activity helps to kind of balance and buffer some of the pH, which is a consideration with a lot of gray water systems. And your question about the freezing, I don't have a lot of experience in working in freezing conditions, but you can get subsurface storage tanks. The bioreactor is also underground too. You could also probably insulate that as well too. You can buy insulated bioreactor tanks too, which is going to be additional cost, but I think you could definitely weatherize these systems with a little bit of effort. The nice thing about a lot of the gray water coming out of the house is most times it's going to come out, it's already warm because it's coming from a shower most of the time. Even laundry is going to come out as warm water, so that can kind of help buffer some of the temperature issues. But with some effort, you could probably weatherize these systems without too much challenge.
Hi, great presentation. Do you know if, because the cost is high for homeowners, right? So is there any future legislation that will actually we're going to have in place in California to actually install gray water systems in homes and newly built developments?
Oh yeah, that's a fantastic. I can talk about that for a long time, but there's been some attempts to make all new construction and major new models gray water ready. So basically what that would mean would be dual plumbing all of the gray water sources, so that you would have a secondary pipe that would go out to somewhere in the house where you could put a tank in the future. There's been a ton of pushback from the construction industry about that. They don't want to have more regulation that's going to increase the cost of their home building, which is really unfortunate, because if you were to make one of these homes gray water ready during the actual new construction or remodel process, I think you could probably do it for, I would say, under $500. You know, but basically a few sticks of ABS pipe and then a throughway valve is really the only absolute necessary parts to make it gray water ready. So I really hope that that legislation changes, but it's been a tough haul because there's a lot of lobbyists that push back on it, unfortunately.
Are you going to stick around for lunch?
Yes, yeah. If anyone, I can talk more about it. If anyone has questions, let me know. I'd love to help you guys get these systems out there. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Alan. I chuckled about the hair because Alan and I presented at the Landscape Summit back in Cupertino 7 years ago, and his hair was much longer, and mine got longer too. So, all right, our next topic today is covers Replenish and green stormwater infrastructure design and maintenance, replenishing the urban landscape. And here today to present is Peter Schultze-Allen with EOA Inc. Peter is a senior scientist at EOA Inc. with extensive experience in the environmental field. He specializes in the integration of public and private green stormwater infrastructure, complete streets, regenerative landscaping, and urban forestry practices. He's additionally received his master composter credentials from Stop Waste while he was running a worm composting business called Community Composters. Please welcome Peter.
Okay, see if I can figure this out. Well, thanks for inviting me here today. I'm glad to be here. And I'm going to talk about green stormwater infrastructure design maintenance. This could be a full day, like a lot of the presentations today. We probably could spend a lot more time on some of these subjects. So I'm going to have to go through it a little quickly. But also I wanted to mention that I'm here representing the Santa Clara Valley Urban Runoff Pollution Prevention Program, which has the great acronym SCVWD. For those of you that haven't heard of SCVWD, it's one of the best ones, I think, in the state. And I work for EOA, and we're the program managers for that program. So, whoa, hello. Wow, that took off. Okay, back to my, wow. Yeah, no, good thing I don't have any good jokes in there. Okay, here we go. So first I want to just talk about some definitions. I think about 3 or 4 definitions, and then we'll give some background. We'll go over the different types of control measures. We're going to focus on bioretention today, but there's a lot of different types of green stormwater infrastructure. And mostly I'm going to talk about larger, or the pictures that I'm going to show are from larger projects. I don't have a lot of kind of single family residential. So sorry about that, but that's kind of the way the regulations work, is not really focusing on single family residential. But a lot of these principles will apply to that as well. We'll talk about design a little bit, construction a little bit, maintenance, and then some additional resources you can use later. So definitions: gray infrastructure is kind of what we typically have in most cities, right? So it's pipes and channels, it's concrete. It doesn't allow for infiltration. It doesn't use plants. So we're trying to move away from that. You can have see these 2 examples here in the pictures. This one on the upper right is actually from Turkey when I was there visiting. And so just kind of a channel, you know, down the middle of a stairway or a street. And then in the bottom right there, you can see, you know, kind of a typical channelized creek, which we also don't, there's a lot of negative aspects to that. So we're trying to move away from these types of systems. And we want to use more, if I can advance here, to green stormwater infrastructure. So this is using natural systems, soil, plants, all different kinds of different natural systems, infiltration into the ground. So those are the things we want to encourage and use. And so there's different kind of subcategories of that. Low impact development is what's usually done on a parcel scale, like on a property. Sometimes people use these terms interchangeably, but we tend at SCVWD, we tend to say green infrastructure is kind of the bigger category. It might be also things in a street or in a parking lot. So you might have the public kind of systems that are like a green street, which we'll talk about. And whereas low impact development is maybe an older term, and it's usually more talking about new and redevelopment projects that are regulated and have to do these types of natural systems that mimic nature on the site. And pervious pavement is another type that I didn't mention. I'll show you an example of that. So then you have the different types of stormwater control measures. And this may be a little hard for you to see, but this picture, and I think I have a closer up version later on. But this picture I included, this graphic, because it's got all the different elements of what's in a bioretention type of stormwater control measure. So of course, there's a lot of acronyms in this field, like there is in every field, but I'll try to not use too much of that those acronyms if I can. So background, I wanted to include just a couple slides about why we care about this issue, about stormwater, what's the problem, and a little bit about the regulatory background. So we're trying to move away from, on the right is the gray funnel, which is what we typically have in a city right now. You have lots of impervious surface, a lot of concrete and asphalt, and that tends to kind of funnel the pollutants out into the bay in our case, or into the ocean. So we're trying to move towards this system of the green filter, which uses the natural systems and allows more infiltration into the soil, kind of getting back to the way it was before you had a lot of development. Well, it seems like I have to click this several times sometimes. Point it that way. Okay, there we go. Maybe that was the problem. Okay, so just one slide on the regulatory overview. You have the Clean Water Act, which is really what's causing or the reason for all this. And that's from the federal level, and US EPA manages that. Then in California, it comes down to the state at the State Water Resources Control Board. And then you have these regional water boards. And so those two agencies have different types of permits that they issue. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but in the Bay Area, we have a municipal regional permit for a lot of the jurisdictions. And so that comes down to the municipal level where they have to implement the stormwater program. So that's just a very basic overview. We're in Region 2 here. And so I also wanted to mention the Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance that a lot of municipalities also and counties, cities and counties have to comply with. There's also if you haven't heard about the Rescape, Regenerative Landscaping Program is another great program that is a nonprofit organization. And so there's a lot of great principles in there. A holistic, as someone mentioned earlier, it's if you really want to do sustainable landscaping or regenerative landscaping correctly, you need to look at the whole system. So it's a great program for that. Okay, so now some different types of stormwater control measures and the locations for them. The locations really come down to these main three categories. You have the kind of the streets or a green street project. You might have the parcel-based or property-based systems like the low impact development. And then you have these larger regional projects where you might have a really large area draining to a park or something like that, where you have even maybe an underground system that might be treating that runoff. So the regional projects, this quarter of an acre is kind of a threshold for that. So these are the different types. I'm not going to go through all of these today, but I have a few pictures to give you some examples. So bioretention is what I'm going to focus on today. Here's a couple examples. These can be all different shapes and sizes. They might be kind of in a, and bioretention is kind of a catch-all. There's really a bunch of subcategories of that, but these are two examples there. You might have a green roof, and green roofs, there's lots of different types of, or living roof. There's different terms for that. You know, have a bunch of different types. There's some that are really thin media, and there's some that are really thick that there's like a park basically. In Oakland, there's, for example, one that's up on a parking garage. And it looks like it has trees and water features. So it looks really like it's down on the ground, but it's up on top of a parking garage. This example is more of the lightweight one. And then pervious pavement, I'm not going to really talk about much today, but I wanted to show you a couple examples of where you might have these interlocking concrete pavers with the water can go through the joints between the pavers, or maybe it goes through the paver itself. There's also other types where it's a pervious concrete that can be also in a paver, or it can be poured in place. So there's a lot of different types of pervious pavement. So getting into bioretention, here's a good slide that shows some of the kind of main aspects of a typical bioretention system. You have at the surface, You might see that overflow inlet there in the middle, and out in the parking lot here, there's a bioretention system, and it has a lot of these elements to it. You see typically if it's in a parking lot or in a street, there'll be a curb with cuts in it so the water can get into the system. So it's a depressed type of landscaping, which is often one of the challenges is that the grading is very important. You need to let the water get into the system. And sometimes that doesn't really work out too well in the construction. Maybe the grading didn't turn out the way that maybe the designer thought. Also, a lot of times in this overflow, you'll see the overflow not raised up like it should. The construction company maybe thinks that was a mistake in the design. They put it flush with the ground, but it's actually supposed to be raised up typically about 6 inches so that the water can pond and then sink down into the ground over a day or less typically. So if you lower that down, then it doesn't really allow for that ponding. So sometimes we see that mistake. There's usually also a pipe that sticks up that's a clean out pipe in case you need to get down below and clean out those under drain pipes that are shown here. In the Bay Area, we have a lot of the clay soils. So typically you have some kind of under drain so that the water doesn't pond for too long because then you can get mosquitoes. So there's this kind of engineering puzzle of what's the right amount of time for that water to sit there, what's too long, what's too short. And that also gets into the media, which is down below, which here it's called biotreatment soil media or BSM. And it's basically for most projects in the Bay Area, it's a mixture of sand and compost. So it's not a soil, as was mentioned before. Unfortunately, we're kind of stuck right now with this particular specification that's 60 to 70% sand and 30 to 40% compost. And over time, it does turn into more of a soil, but in the beginning, it's just those two things mixed together, and so we call it a media. And it really doesn't hold water for very long, and that can increase your water demand, unfortunately. But because it's this highly engineered system, we needed to have a very highly engineered media, and it has a very specific specification that it has to meet. Below that 18 inches, then there's the mulch on top, which is a very crucial layer, and a lot of times people forget about the mulch or they don't have it in the design. So we're often reminding people, no, the mulch is actually very important. 3 inches of mulch is required by that state water efficient landscape ordinance. And there's different types of mulches that I'll talk about in the presentation. At the very bottom, you have this, what we call class 2 permeable material. That's a Caltrans spec, and that's important to protect that underdrain so that you don't get the media washing out through the underdrain. And typically these systems all go back to the storm drain system. So it's kind of a flow through system. It doesn't maybe always infiltrate into the soil a lot. It might be a temporary holding of the water, filtering of the water, and then sending it back to the storm drain system. But we do want to encourage infiltration whenever we can. Give a quick question. I'll repeat it after you ask. The total profile, 3 inches of mulch, 18 inches of the BSM, 12 inches of the class 2 perm. So that's, can't remember what that adds up to, but a couple feet. But that can vary too. You might have more BSM in some locations, but that's kind of the minimum is 18 inches for the biotreatment soil media. Then there's also the surface kind of ponding of the 6 inches. So there's a few other aspects to it. Yeah. Okay, so here's a typical, this is actually kind of a street parking lot, hybrid area here, but the water that you can't maybe see it too well, but there's some slope. And so the water's coming down from kind of the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen, and you have these curb cuts, but the water's not all getting in there because of the slope, and the water can pick up some speed sometimes. So on the right, the bottom right is a better type of design for that curb cut. It's got more slope to it. And there's sometimes a kind of a throat as well. So the water has a chance to make that turn and go into the system. But a lot of times you'll see water is not making that 90-degree turn because they didn't really design it correctly. So that's something that's been evolving over time. So now I'm going to talk about plant selection a little bit. And I did want to mention that I've been working with Valley Water, Ashley at Valley Water, to talk about what are the best types of plants. We're also working on a vegetation guide for bioretention systems, a maintenance guide. So there's also a lot happening in this area, but this part is going to be about design. And when you're selecting your plants, these are a bunch of different things to take into consideration. I'm not going to go through all of them because we don't have as much time, but there's a bunch of good reasons or kind of criteria that you want to look at. The types of plants also have these aspects to them. They are deeper rooted is better. They're perennial plants. Typically, we're not using a lot of annual plants just to keep the maintenance costs down. We want plants that can survive some inundation of water, but most of the time it's going to be dry and the soil is going to be drying out. So they've got to be plants that can handle that in these sandy, fast draining soils. We're trying to get more natives. People like to have some variety of plants, but as long as they're not invasives, then we generally say if they meet all these other criteria, they don't have to be a native to California, but we do encourage that. And when Ashley was reminding me that you also have to look at maybe more, even more local plants of like, what are the ecotypes of the plants that are maybe even more specific to your area, and working with nurseries that can provide those plants that are maybe even more specific to your region than just say, oh, it's a Juncus patens that, you know, species or subspecies that could be anywhere in the state, but maybe in your region you have a more specific ecotype that you want to use. We have a lot of plant lists in our guidance materials. This is you probably can't read that. I don't expect you to be able to read that, but it's just, you can go to these documents that I'll give you at the end. There's some links to the documents and you can see some of these plant lists. And as I mentioned, they're kind of recommended plant lists. If a landscape architect or designer has another plant that they think will work well, most jurisdictions will say, well, just give me the rationale why you want to use that plant. And if it sounds reasonable, then they'll let you use it. But this is our kind of guidance lists that we have. And so now I have a bunch of pictures of some of the the different plants. I have I think about 10 or 12 plants here that we see most commonly. And I'm not saying that these are the best plants to use, but these are the ones that are most commonly used. This one, this is probably number one. The gray rush, Juncus patens, is probably the most frequently used. It tends to kind of stay green even in the summer with low water. And it's very hardy. But there are some issues with it that I'll mention in the maintenance section. There's another in the rush family here, not a native one, but commonly used. Berkeley sedge, this one, there's actually two of these plants. I don't know how many people know. There's like a non-native version of the Berkeley sedge, and there's a native one. They often get confused. This one, the Tumulacola, is the native one. This one I really like a lot. This is when the kind of the purplish color is just coming out, and you can see that it's been trimmed a little bit. So the hairy onmulia has different names for it, but it's a nice one to look at too. There's also a version of this that is native. I think it's the white flowering one. I don't think this one is the native one. Deer grass is used a lot as well. The blue fescue, there's also a couple types here that one's native, one's not, but they can add some nice color. And Lamandra is a non-native plant that we're also starting to see quite a bit. Very hardy, I think low water using plant, and also can stay green. This is another one from Southern California that is getting to be more common, the giant wild rye. And it has Lamus or Elmus condensatus, two different kind of names. Our Ceanothus, California, there's a bunch of different types. I like the creeping one because it doesn't really block vision when especially if you're using it in a street environment. You want to have a low growing version of that. And then our California fuchsia, some of the flowering ones here. This yarrow is becoming common as also, and there's a white flowering one that's a native. I think this yellow one is not native, but they're both good plants. So a little bit about the BSM. I've already mentioned a bunch of this, I think, but this kind of summarizes the characteristics of this media. So you can't just use any soil. You do need to have, especially if it's a regulated project, regulated through the permit, you need to use this particular type of mixture. There is an alternative process you can go through if you want to experiment with something different. You can, and you can try using different additives, and it has a slightly different testing procedure for that. But this is the kind of the standard that most people use. And there's a bunch of different suppliers for this around the Bay Area. So now I'm going to talk about mulch. So we have wood mulch and rock mulch. We see both being used, and then sometimes a combination, and there's advantages and disadvantages for them. I was going to ask also about rock mulch and how it compares to wood mulch, especially with that 25% kind of water savings issue. I'm in San Jose. The city really doesn't want to use rock mulch because they are concerned. And it makes sense what you were saying about the desert plants, that they would be used to that, but we're not really using, I don't think, typically the desert type plants in these bioretention systems. So they do respond better, I think, to the wood mulch, and the rock mulch can really heat up and cause problems. You can lose maybe water. You could have a negative instead of a positive with the rock mulch in a hotter climate. So, but I wanted to just mention a few different aspects of mulch here, because it is a common question for bioretention systems where they're getting flooded with water, and then it can float and you lose the mulch, or it makes a big mess. So this is what maybe more typically has been used as an uncomposted wood mulch, or maybe a bark mulch. What we're trying to get people to use more now is a composted wood mulch. So it's maybe tree trimmings that have gone through a composting process. So arbor mulch is a name for tree trimmings. So composted arbor mulch or composted wood mulch, we think is a really promising development. There are some companies that are already selling this. They might call it bioretention mulch or composted wood mulch. It has, well, I think I've got a slide coming up about it. Just to talk about the other types quickly, we have this small kind of gravel mulch, which can work well. Then you have medium and large size rock. And I see these, this particular picture is from San Francisco, and they use a lot of rock mulch. And sometimes it's because it's a very small system and they didn't have enough space to put in a bigger bioretention area. So it would get blown out in a storm with wood mulch. So they use this rock mulch because it's undersized and they didn't really maybe have a choice. Also, it's a milder climate there, so they're not as concerned about that heat issue. They're also the only city in the Bay Area or most of California that's a combined storm sewer system. So they're actually going to be treating the water again later. This is really just to kind of hold it back for a little while so that their system doesn't get as overwhelmed during a big storm. So they've got a bunch of different criteria to look at in storm, thank you, in San Francisco. But we do see these, the dry creek bed look, which to me is not, I don't think ideal. I'd rather see plants with wood mulch in most cases. Sometimes you'll see a dry creek bed as a way to convey the water from one place to another. That's good. But what I find with these kind of systems is that they're difficult to maintain, because if the weeds are growing up in there or you get sediment in there, you got to move all that rock out of the way, and it's a pain in the neck, literally, maybe to move it all. And there's even a maintenance guide that shows like the maintenance people pulling the rock out and piling them up on the side of the system and then having to put it all back. So I think the wood mulch has a lot of advantages over rock mulch if you can do it. Here's an example of a hybrid system where in the kind of the flow line where you have the rock, the gravel, and on the sides you have the wood mulch. I'm not going to go through all these, but needless to say, when you start really diving into the topic of mulch, there's a lot to think about. And I'm going to show you just some of these things. But the worst type of mulch, if I were to summarize this, is the micro bark, where it's all the same size of little bits of bark, and bark floats a lot, and it's all the same size. So it tends to really float and move and go down that overflow or make a big mess. And the best, we think, is this composted arbor mulch or composted wood mulch. So there's a lot of benefits to composted wood mulch. Some of the newer ones are SB 1383, if people have heard about that. It's about keeping organic material out of the landfill. And so cities and counties have to purchase a lot of composted mulch and use it. And this actually gives, composted wood mulch gives you a lot more credit towards that procurement requirement that they have to comply with. I think it's actually this year is the first year that they have to start complying with that requirement to purchase a lot of mulch and compost. Also, it floats less, it's less flammable. It reduces pathogens that might be in the raw material after it goes through the composting process, gets rid of a lot of those pathogens like sudden oak death. So there's a lot of advantages to it. This slide has some animation And it's showing how on the left, the water will flow down the street and it will go into these curb cuts and fill up in a cell. And then once that cell fills up, then it'll continue down the street to the next one. So if you have wood mulch in that kind of system, if once it fills up, it just moves down to the next one. So it's less likely to get blown out in a big storm. And so you have maybe more options on the mulch type. The one on the right has the water, pretty much all the water goes through that first curb cut and it can blow out the system. So it's, you have less flexibility on that system on the right. And some water will go around it, but a lot of it will go through the system. And so it can be trickier. Okay, so I'm running out of time, but we have some typical maintenance issues. These are a bunch of the different ones that you might, and the system on the right here was just kind of they took out some of the dead plants and they replaced the compost layer. They put a layer of compost on top to replace some of the compost that might have gone away that was down below. Fresh mulch, they checked the irrigation system, did some pruning, that kind of thing. So that's some typical, and removed maybe some trash that might have been in there. This is an example from San Jose's maintenance guide. So I encourage you to look at that. I've got a link to it at the end of the presentation. Just to show you kind of an evolution of a biotreatment system on the left here, the different plants that this location put in over the 10 years or so that it's been in place here. Some problems with the plants. Recycled water sometimes can be a problem for some plants because of the salinity in the water. So you might need to adjust the plants you're using. And then this is the most recent. They switched to the yarrow for this one. Just some other maintenance issues in the back corner there. They didn't have a splash block, so that's got some erosion happening. Here, where there's no mulch, the mulch is maybe all decomposed, and you've got your exposed irrigation systems there. So it's important really to replenish that mulch on a regular basis. Here, the plants, that's the overflow drain in the back there. You can't even really see it very well. The plants are kind of overgrown. So they cut back and prune some of it, but then they didn't put some fresh mulch in. So that would be a recommendation for that. This one is actually one of the most important things, I think, is to know the plant that you have. And so that's what our vegetation guide is going to talk about. This particular planting here has a lot of rushes in it, and they came in, they trimmed them all down to the ball shape, which is typical maybe for a bunch grass and maybe fine to do with a lomandra or some kind of or deer grass or something like that. Those plants typically will respond well to severe pruning, but rushes don't. And a lot of times they will die if you prune them to this kind of ball shape. So we're trying to get people to be able to recognize the plants better with this vegetation guide that we're coming out with. If you see standing water, it might be okay for a day, but if you see algae growing in it, it's probably been there for more than a day. So that's a good sign. I don't see this very often, but then you could get a mosquito problem. West Nile virus can be, a real issue. So we don't want to see algae growing in any of these systems. And these are the additional resources. I know you might not be able to read that very well, but you can see in the presentation, you can get it later. I think all of these presentations are going to be made available to you, so you can look these up later. In the middle there, the SCVWD GSI vegetation guides coming out this summer, we think, so look for that. And that's the end of my presentation. I think of my contact information there. So thank you. Sorry that was so fast, but hopefully some good information.
Questions? Okay.
Hi, great presentation. We maintain a lot of bioretention areas. And are you at the state level? And if so, how does it kind of work? I saw your hierarchy there. Yeah. We work with a lot of like local city municipalities. Yeah. We get a lot of mixed messages. Is there one like reigning or overarching rules that we can point to say, I understand you're trying to tell me this, but the rules actually say this?
Yeah, well, so the way it works, I work, our company, we manage this Santa Clara Valley urban runoff. So it's a county-wide kind of stormwater program, or most of the county. That's the way it's pretty much set up, is that there's these county-wide stormwater programs. So like San Mateo has a county-wide stormwater program, and they produce guidance documents for all the municipalities in San Mateo County. That one's called SMCWIP. Then you have SCVWD is the one for the Santa Clara Valley. You've got one for Alameda County, the Clean Water Program for Alameda. So each of them have their guidance documents, but it's sometimes kind of up to each city to also decide if they want to follow that guidance or not. So there's some things that are written into the permit, but in terms of like bioretention maintenance, it just says it has to perform well. The plants have to be healthy. You know, it's very vague. So you're really leaving it up to this guidance that comes out more at the county-wide level or maybe even the city level. So unfortunately, you know, no, there's not any one thing you can point to and say, especially in the whole state, you know, there's a lot of different guidance documents. I think they're all pretty similar. Like what I just showed you is what most of them are going to say. But if there's a particular issue, we can talk about it over lunch but there is a lot of training I think that is needed, and specifically on that, like plant identification and knowing what plants you have, aside from are they the best plants or not, just what are the most common ones. That's kind of our approach, is grouping these plants into 3 categories: the rushes, the flowering plants with the big flowers, and then like the bunch grasses. So those are the 3 categories. I didn't really go into that today, but that's our approach for this vegetation guide. And we are going to hopefully see more trainings happening too.
All right, we've got I think one online question, and then we're going to wrap it up. So
Yeah, so Mary Online asks, what trees do you like for bioretention basins?
Yeah, that's another presentation. Trees and bioretention. I focus today on small plants because it's a lot, I think, simpler. I think there's a huge potential for using trees, especially street trees. I may have showed an example even right here, actually. There's a tree there. I can't remember now what type that is. It might be a robinia, if I'm remembering correctly, one of those purple flowering ones. So this strip here is in Emeryville, where I used to work. And so you have a bike ped facility on the left there, and you've got a street on the right, and the water from the street flows into this barrier between the two. In terms of what species I can recommend, I've seen a bunch of different things. I'm not sure we really know yet what the best trees are. I think we're still in the experimental phase. And unfortunately with trees, it can take a longer period of time to figure out if it was the right tree or not. The small plants, you could figure out, you know, within a couple of years, whether it was a good decision or not, usually. But so there's a lot of potential with urban forestry integration with green stormwater infrastructure. And you know, it's going to require changing the way we design the street tree planting system, and the maintenance, of course, is a big need for trees in general. So I can't really give you much more than that right now, but we do have these guidance documents that I mentioned there, and there's guidance about trees in there as well. So thank you very much. And if anybody wants to talk to me during the break, I'll be here for lunch. So thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Well, we're glad you all could be here with us today. And those of you on virtually, glad to be with us online. Today or tomorrow, you're going to receive an email asking for your feedback. We highly appreciate it, what your thoughts were on today and what you want to see in future summits. In that survey, you'll also have an opportunity to join the landscape committee. We value diverse opinions from all sectors of the landscape community, and we really love to have you. We also have a physical sign-up sheet of the Valley water tables outside. Thank you. The presentations will be available online. I can't tell you when, but we will have that, and we will have video of the presentations this afternoon. So expect to see those soon, assuming you signed up with your email address.